Welcome to The Explainer. You know, we often talk about big, sweeping historical movements, but today we're going to zoom in. We're going to look at the people whose personal courage, brilliance, and sheer resilience really define the fight for civil rights. All right, let's get into it.
So let's kick things off with this quote from Ruby Bridges. It just gets right to the heart of what we're talking about today. How, in the middle of all this hate, a simple human connection can be an act of defiance. This one sentence really sets the stage for everything.
But, to really get a handle on why these stories are so powerful, we have to understand what they were up against. This wasn't just about changing minds, it was about taking on an entire system, a legal and social structure built from the ground up on inequality.
And that system had a name: Jim Crow. I mean, think of it like this invisible, but incredibly strong web of laws. It was designed to keep Black and white Americans separate in every single part of life, and to deny African Americans their basic rights. Okay, so here's where it gets interesting. Legally, on paper, this system was starting to show cracks. You had these huge court rulings. But, as you can imagine, a piece of paper from a court in Washington, D.C., and what was actually happening on a street in Alabama? Two totally different worlds. Making that paper a reality? Well, that was going to take some serious bravery. And that bravery, well, sometimes it shows up in the most unexpected places. In this case, it came in the form of a 6-year-old girl from New Orleans, just trying to go to school.
Can you imagine? This was the sound that greeted her every single day. Little Ruby Bridges later said she actually thought this chant was just a nursery rhyme at first. That's the innocence that was confronting this wall of pure hate, escorted by U.S. Marshals just to get into her first-grade classroom.
And this really paints a picture of her two different worlds, right? Outside that school, it was all hate and noise, but the second she walked through that classroom door, everything changed. And that change, it was all because of one person.
So get this, because all the white parents pulled their kids out of the school, Ruby was the only student in her class for the whole year. Her teacher, Barbara Henry, became her only classmate. She literally built a safe haven for this little girl, proving that one person, just one person, can be a shield against an entire world of hate. Okay, so from the schoolhouse steps, let's pivot to a totally different kind of battlefield. This one wasn't fought on the streets, it was fought on chalkboards and with pencils at NASA, right in the middle of the space race. You've got astronaut John Glenn, about to make history, right? First American to orbit the Earth. And before he trusts these brand new, giant electronic computers with his life, he says, "Get the girl to check the numbers." The girl? He was talking about Katherine Johnson, a human computer whose brain was the ultimate safety check. I mean, her work wasn't just a side project, it was mission critical. She wasn't just plugging in numbers. She was literally mapping the path for humans to go to space, from the very first flights all the way to the Apollo 11 moon landing. Her math was the hidden blueprint for success. So, Katherine Johnson wasn't just solving equations about space, right? She was also solving the equations of inequality right there on Earth. She started in a segregated unit, but she used her incredible mind and her persistence to literally demand a seat at the table, getting her name on research papers and forcing her way into meetings no woman had ever been in before.
All right, so we've seen the courage of a little girl, the genius of a single mathematician. Now let's zoom out to the power of many. Let's talk about the Freedom Riders.
That was the warning from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. himself. So picture this. It's 1961. A group of Black and white activists get on a bus together to ride into the Deep South. Why? Their mission sounded simple. Just test a new Supreme Court ruling that said you couldn't segregate on interstate travel. But it was anything but simple. And tragically, Dr. King was right. They were met with absolute brutality. They were attacked, beaten. One of their buses was firebombed by a mob. And through all of this, they never, ever fought back. That was the whole point of their nonviolent protest. So what do you do when you're met with that kind of violence? Well, their strategy was brilliant. When they were arrested, they refused to pay bail. This jail no bail tactic, it did two things. It clogged up the prisons, making it a huge problem for the state of Mississippi. And it made so much noise that the national news and the federal government couldn't ignore it anymore. Okay, so let's jump forward about a decade to 1971. The fight is still going on, but now the battleground is the yellow school bus in Dallas, Texas, during the first days of court-ordered busing to desegregate schools. Imagine being a kid on your way to school, and you're surrounded by reporters asking one question over and over. Are you nervous?
For these kids and their parents, this wasn't some abstract historical moment. It was real, and it was scary.
And just listen to this student's answer. It's not some grand political statement. It's real. She's worried about how she'll be treated, if she'll be safe, and if she's even going to get a good education. That's the human side of all this.
But then you hear this. Amidst all that anxiety, another student says this. She's basically saying, it doesn't matter where they send me. I'm going to get my education. This is my school now. That's ownership. That's power. Right there in that one sentence.
So when you look at all these stories, the child, the mathematician, the activist, the students, it's pretty clear this isn't about one single victory. These are all just steps on a much, much longer journey.
And that brings us right back to where we started, with Ruby Bridges. 35 years later, she went back to that same school, but this time, she was there to help. For her, that walk wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of what she called an uphill climb.
The incredible courage of people like Ruby Bridges, Katherine Johnson, and all those freedom riders, it absolutely changed this country. They forced America to look in the mirror. They showed us what their uphill climb looked like. So the question they kind of hand off to us is, what does that climb look like today?